Smitchichu says, morning lads, planning on running a long hypertrophy block after this next BJJ tourney. How do you guys like to set up pure hypertrophy training in regards to splits, days per week, etc.? So I have a couple of general rules of thumb that I usually stick to on these. Days per week for hypertrophy, to be honest, almost never delves outside 4 days a week, either lower or higher. To be honest, if you're an athlete doing a hypertrophy block, you need around 4 days, usually more than 4 days, unless you're enhanced, is non-ideal. Then in terms of splits, I don't do the kind of lower body day, upper body day, push day, pull day. I just select a group of exercises I know that are going to be very effective for me or for the athlete. Usually they're exercises that the athlete had some high or moderately high level of affinity for. So the big thing with hypertrophy training is we're going towards failure or gaining so much volume with these particular exercises that they never ever want to be in any way novel, in any way new. They should be something that the athlete can do basically when they're asleep. So for a lot of athletes that I deal with, it's going to be squats, deadlifts, RDLs, bent over rows, strict press, possibly some push press, then some seated dumbbell work, some dumbbell bench, some barbell bench press. And to be honest, it doesn't get a lot more complicated than that. They might, if they have access to machines, we might utilize the machines, but the exercise selection is a big thing, and kind of sitting down with your sheet of paper and saying, okay, these are my 3 or 4 lower body exercises. These are my 4 or 6 upper body exercises. And then the last thing you do is you select the exercise that you know you have to keep doing for some semblance of prehab or staying healthy or maintaining good midline recruitment. That's usually the kind of last 20% or 25% of every training session. And then when I have that decision made, I'm going to start off by finding an appropriate volume that somebody can do, and then hammering them with volume at appropriate load with that set of exercises. For most people, 8 weeks is pretty good. 12 weeks is better for their hypertrophy blocks.
So the kind of thing is like, we never do just pure hypertrophy for someone that isn't with a view that it's leading on to somewhere else. So it's always leading on to a strength training phase, or maybe it's leading back to competition. Maybe it's during competition phase. Maybe it's going to a mix of hypertrophy and strength training. The idea of just hypertrophy with no further end goal isn't something that we generally do from our point of view, because it is a very unidirectional way of taking your training when you don't need to do that. You know, there is more ways of exploiting it, and it's not the best for pure performance at the end. So even if we have someone who's doing loads of hypertrophy so they can move up in a weight class, the idea there is that they're going to move up in a weight class, but also be able to use this new muscle mass for strength training in the end. One thing I would say is also be very cautious of, even if you're incredibly fit now, and know what if that means in aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, your VO2 max is in a great place at the moment, you're super efficient with all the oxygen you're taking in. Every kilo of muscle, of just say muscle in itself, weight has every kilo of mass has a big impact on your aerobic capacity and your VO2 max, but muscle mass in itself also has a big impact. So every kilo of mass you gain is going to have a really detrimental effect on your VO2 mass in the short term, and unless you're a freak in the long term, it is going to reduce it a little bit, your top end capacity compared to where you are now. So if you're going from 80 now and your VO2 max is as good as it could be for your genetics, if you get to 82, so let's say we add up to finally finish our pre-comp or whatever at 82, and we've added 2 kilos of muscle mass, which would be unbelievable. Even in the interim, if you're doing a lot of jiu-jitsu, you're still reducing your conditioning capacity, your VO2 max. So just be super conscious of, by the time you're finished your hypertrophy phase, you will have to put a lot of work in to the conditioning after that. So once you're finished, then you can recoup and get back to a place where you are in a really good conditioning factor especially for jiu-jitsu. Now, 2 kilos of mass is a crazy amount of soft tissue to gain for any natural athlete. So, you know, you're not going to be impacted that much, but you will be surprised if you do gain a significant amount of weight, that how much it will negatively impact. We're like 5 kilos of mass, not even 5 kilos of muscle mass, will really, really
my
impact
God,
your
yeah.
conditioning like crazy. Now you can get back to a place once you finish the weight gain, you can get back to a really well conditioned place, but it's just something to be aware of that in the interim it is going to be not detrimental, but certainly noticeable.
What's super important here as well is you're going to get back to that high level of cardiovascular conditioning, and the further you allow yourself to get away from it when you're in the hypertrophy phase, the more of that gained mass you're going to have to lose to get back there. So take, for example, somebody in an off season like you're going to do a hypertrophy block. You're 80 kilos at the moment. You want to get to 85. If you just do the hypertrophy training and don't stay in touch with that aerobic capacity work, you'll find within your first 4 to 6 weeks of starting to transition back, you'll have lost an awful lot of condition. Maybe you'll be back down to 83, 82 kilos. Whereas if you stay in touch with the aerobic work, it's a lot easier to stay up at the 85 kilos as you kind of gain that work capacity again. So just be uber conscious of that. It's the same reason we've kind of stopped letting go of all conditioning work during athletes' off seasons. It's way better if you go back into your kind of preseason training with an amount or a semblance of aerobic conditioning.